In Psalm 17:7, David says, "Show me thy marvelous love and kindness, O Lord." And what a thought! Show me thy marvelous love and kindness. Yesterday, I went through. I talked about England and that year that we were home, and really, I just flew through it without really thinking about it. But this morning, when I woke up, and that was the text I read, "Show me thy love and marvelous love and kindness, O Lord." And 92 was an incredible year. That year that we went home, God surely showed us his marvelous love and kindness. And he's the same always. God's a great God. You know, before we come home in the 6 years that we've been in America, from 86 till 92, God showed us his love and kindness in an amazing way. The provision was unbelievable, the way things opened up for us. But then in 93, when we went home, we realized that all the 6 years that we've been in America, not one time did we go to the doctor's. Or we had 4 children. Ruth Ann was born, of course, in January, and that was the only January of 91, March of 91. And none of them, we had never been to doctors for any other reason apart from that. But when we got home to England in 92, we were staying in the house that Teddy and Janice had vacated while I stayed in ours, and it was going to be for that year. But just the provision of God was unbelievable. But one day we were in the house in the living room, and was a shriek. Hannah, who was about 7 or 8 years old, was in the bath with Ruth Ann, and they were both getting a bath, and a mirror fell off the wall. And it really sliced into her leg. And when she cried, I remember running in and holding her leg and getting Angie to call the ambulance. And that was the first time that we'd ever been troubled. But the provision of God, God had made, we hadn't had any accidents, no incidents, and all of a sudden we're here and we were able to go to the hospital. It never cost us a dime. And then a couple of months after that, Angie miscarried and God provided. But it wasn't all sorrowful things. It was just an amazing year. While we were home in England that year, I had the opportunity to do things I'd never done in England before. I've been in the prisons of Alabama, and somehow word got through to some of the pastors, chaplains in the north of England, about this guy who had a testimony, was saved in England in the prison. So in a Methodist lady, a Methodist minister in Walton Prison, Liverpool, which is several hundred yards away from my house, but I'd spent many times, in fact, been in there 6 times. And during that time, this Methodist lady called me in 93 and said, you know, she'd heard about me, would I like to come in to Walton Prison? And I said, yeah, I would. And so it was set up that I'd go back into Walton Prison, and went into a chapel area, and there was about 10 men there. And I never forget, it was a drug class. You know, they were drug addicts, and they were in this class learning about how to get off drugs, I guess, or living free of drugs. But they were in this class anyway, rehabilitation. And I got the opportunity to share testimony and to preach to them. And 4 of them raised their hands and come, you know, asked the Lord into their hearts. They found forgiveness. And when we'd finished, one of the men said, hey preacher, we've never heard anything like this before in our lives. Could you come back again? Excuse me. Now I remember looking at the Methodist lady, and I said to her, well, that depends upon your minister. And so she said, could you come back again next week? And I said, yes, I would. I'd love to come back. And the next week we come, and I promise you, it was packed. Them guys had brought guys from everywhere. And I got so excited. I really preached my heart out. Many come to know the Lord. It was a great experience. But afterward, I preached. She said, would you like me to show you around the prison? And she took me up onto G-Wing. And on G2 was a place called Skid Row. And she took me there, and she took me to my cell. She asked me to remember the last cell I was in. It was in G2, and it was strange. There's a little tiny spy holes in there. And I looked in the spy hole in the window into the cell. There was nobody in there, but I looked through that spy hole, and it was a strange thing. The last time I'd looked through the spy hole in that place was from the opposite direction, and I'd been taking some tablets, some pills, drugs. I don't know where it was, but I remember looking, and an officer was looking at the other side, and his head was large. But here I am. This time I'm looking through, and it was strange. It was like I'd never been in that place ever before in my life. Not long after that, I was invited to a place in Blackpool, a prison called Kirkham. And now, the chaplain at that place invited me, and it was an amazing time. And after I preached, he called me back. I preached, I can't remember how much I preached that time, but several souls come to know the Lord. But when I left that day, he called me back, the chaplain, a couple of days later, and he said, it's possible that you could come on back again for one day. And I said, yeah. He said, I don't want you to preach, I want you to meet a guy, and his name is Alan. So I said, okay. He said, you might know him from the past. And sure enough, when I went the next day, this guy was in hospital with emphysema, and he was in a real bad state, and I recognized him right away. From years before, it was 17, 18 years before, I recognized him right away. He didn't recognize me, but I began to talk to him, and I said I knew him, and he began to talk about guys that I knew. I knew that I worked on the hot plate in Walton and Sea Wing, and he said, no, I don't remember you. And I said, do you remember this guy? He said, yeah. He said, I remember that guy. And he began to tell me how bad a guy he was himself, and he was a real bad guy. He was doing life. He'd murdered someone and he drowned somebody on one of those ferries across the Mersey. And I had the privilege of leading him to the Lord. I know he died not long after that. But it was terrific to go back into these places. And again, I got an opportunity to go into a prison in Preston. And when I went in there the first time, I went 2 or 3 times, but the first time I went, there was a few guys in there, and I preached. And then the second time I went in there was a guy, a big old guy, and his name was Alan. Again, Alan. Not Andy. His name was Andy. And afterwards he told me who he was, and he was big, and he reminded me. I knew his father years previously that had been in that prison, and his name was Andy, from the Kirby area of Liverpool. And this young boy was doing 4 years for something, I forget what it was, bank robbery or something. But when you do 4 years in England, it's hard. And 4 years seems a long time. But anyway, the next time I come, back to Preston, I had the privilege to lead him to the Lord too. God's marvelous love and kindness, and him that saves was working all the time. Even though we were in England, it was amazing. But then that summertime, we got the opportunity to go back to Scotland, to the Faith Acres, to the summer camp. And I loved it. It was just a great, great year. We took our kids up there, and we stayed for that summer camp. I remember one night, one afternoon, Pastor Simon was talking to me, and he said, Pete, he said, we need a tent real bad. And I said, what do you need a tent for? He said, well, to do outreaches. We could put a tent up. He said, we need the money, but unfortunately, he said, at this time, I'm taking care of all the pastors that have come from America, and the offerings will be going to the preachers. He said, I need a way of raising the money. And he said, can you think of anything? And right off the top of my head, I said, yeah, get someone to do some sponsored push-ups. And he said, what? I said, do a sponsored push-up. And he said, what's that? So I explained it to him. He said, well, who'd do the push-ups? I said, me. Well, I weighed about 145 pounds in a bag of bones. And he said, okay. So that night he announced in a main service, and there's hundreds of people there from everywhere. He announced that the next day what we needed the tent for, and that we were going to do a sponsored tent. And he asked how many would like to sponsor. And as far as I could see, nearly everybody in that tent sponsored, a push-up the next afternoon. So the next afternoon, I'm walking across for lunch, And the pastor come up behind me, he said, Brother Pete, he said, I'm going to sponsor you a pound of push-up. That was like $3 at that time to a pound. And I said to him, you don't want to do that, Pastor. And he looked at me and he put his finger on his lip. That's what he always did when he's perplexed. He said, what are you talking about? I said, I don't know, but you don't want to be sponsoring a pound of push-up that's going to cost you a lot of money. Well, that afternoon, Neil, his son, Neil Cameron, who was the youth pastor at that time, conducted the sponsored push-up. And we had quite a crowd that had come and watched. And I did 903 push-ups in an hour. Well, that night, that night was so funny. That night, the pastor asked Neil, the youth, his son, to stand up and announce how many push-ups we'd done. And he said, how many did you do? And Neil said, we did 903. You could hear a hush all over the place. And again, the pastor's finger went to his lip. So when I got up, I said, look, you don't have to, some had pledged 50 pence or a pound. I said, no, even if you make it 10 pence or 20 pence, that would be fine. You know what we did? We bought the tent, we bought the seats, and we bought the generator. Amazing. It was a great year. It's just the loving kindness of God, the marvelous loving kindness of God. And it was one of the best years of our life. Of course, I could say that about every year. His loving kindness is better than life. God bless you. Have an amazing day today. Be encouraged at the goodness of God. Amen.